Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Monday, August 26, 2019. Definitely a lot to talk about. It seemed that yesterday a lot of people were dismissing Dorian as heading into the Caribbean and dying out, which it still might do. But looking at it today, things look like they are starting to change and lean more towards a possible scenario where Dorian is stronger, maybe reaching hurricane intensity, and getting closer to Puerto Rico with direct impacts, as well, of course, as Eastern Dominican Republic, and then from there, we'll just have to wait and see. So lots to talk about today for sure. Let's start off with a look at the CIMSS, that's the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies homepage. This gives us a good beginning look at what's happening around the globe, and with the exception of this low pressure area, weak low over here in the far western Pacific, the Atlantic Basin is where all of the activity is currently. We have Invest Area 98L, which is on its way to developing slowly, and I'm going to show you why I think this is having some bearing on what is happening with the steering of Dorian. And then, of course, here is Tropical Storm Dorian. All right, looking at the satellite animation here from the Tropical Tidbits site, a few things to point out. Here is Invest Area 98L. The energy with this is elongated, but it is gradually focusing and will eventually become a tropical storm or maybe a subtropical storm. You already have a pretty good low pressure area, extratropical low. That means it's in the mid-latitudes and is deriving most of its energy from the atmosphere instead of pulling heat out of the ocean necessarily. But this is more of your somewhat hybrid mix of ocean-derived storm and mid-latitude energy. Nonetheless, it's going to be a fairly potent storm system that should eventually work its way up here towards the Canadian Maritimes. And whoever that girl, I guess her name is Greta, I have not followed it that closely, seen it on social media, the young woman that is sailing across the Atlantic. Presumably she's up here somewhere. Hopefully her crew is well aware of meteorological conditions because, well, I mean, just look how active it is up here. But there's also, besides her, shipping interest up there, the sword boats, etc., that come out of Gloucester. You name it. It goes on with maritime traffic, tropical cyclones, extratropical storms, whatever the case may be. They all have impacts on shipping interest, whether it's a small boat with a teenage girl or large shipping vessels filled with cargo containers or sword boats or whatever the case may be. So we watch all of this. And you folks up here in Atlantic Canada, keep an eye on this feature as it develops. I'll certainly be talking about it over the coming days. Here is Dorian. This, what we're looking at, is an infrared satellite animation that shows us the colors representing the cloud top temperatures. And so the higher up in the atmosphere the clouds extend, the way Levi Cowan, who is the author of the code behind this at tropicaltidbits.com, has color-coded it. When you start to see these reds and oranges in here, then the black color, sometimes white, in this colorized infrared, those clouds reach higher in the atmosphere. They are colder, and that means that the convection or the thunderstorm activity is stronger. It's a sign of the health of whatever you're looking at, the thunderstorms involved with it. So now let's switch over to a visible satellite imagery, black and white visible, and you notice a couple of things here. Generally speaking, Dorian is much better organized than it was yesterday. It has this very well-developed band up here to the north, the center of circulation located in here somewhere. It is still battling dry air in the vicinity from time to time, but look at a couple of things that are very important in terms of the potential. The dry air, which is a stabilizing mechanism, notwithstanding, notice the way the clouds here are just kind of spreading out. They're just kind of gradually let me bring me back on here because I need some body language to explain this. Instead of them being sheared off in one direction like that, they're spreading out, right? Like if you took a fan and you make a little fan out of paper and you spread it out. That's what those clouds are doing, and they're doing so in that clockwise fashion. And that is very important because that is the outflow that is not restricted very much on that western and northwestern side. It's maybe a little choked off on the east. There's a little bit, you can see that right there, a little bit of outflow going on there, but it's best right over here. And that means that the air coming in at the surface is able to rise and then spread out at the top, evenly distributed, at least on one of the quadrants or maybe a couple of the quadrants. It's not completely choked off. This is not the most ideal environment, but as I will show you, it does have some things favorable in its path. Though, where it's located right in here, this is the shear map from the University of Wisconsin, and it's a lot of lines here. I know it's complicated to try to figure out what's what. Dorian is in here, and right now it's in this green area of favorable shear values, the change of wind direction with height. But out ahead of it, the shear starts to increase, and in parts of the islands here, it's 25 to 30 knots, generally out of the south-southwest ahead of the system. But if this shear moves west in tandem with Dorian, then it could continue to flourish. And we'll have to see. There's no way to know for sure what's going to happen. We turn to computer models for guidance, etc., but there's no way to know for absolute certain. This is just one of the many analysis tools out there. Shear, dry air, those are very inhibiting factors. Land interaction, obviously, if this tracks over especially the eastern part of the island of Hispaniola, Dominican Republic to be specific, that could cause tremendous weakening of Dorian. The other thing I want you to notice, going back to the infrared shot, it's definitely larger in its aerial coverage than it was yesterday. You can see that on the wide shot, and you can also notice that here even on the zoomed in, what we call the floater shot. There's Barbados in here, so this is going to be passing rather inclement weather very close to Barbados throughout the rest of the day and through tomorrow. Then, as we get beyond that time frame, the Lesser Antilles over here, kind of a split between the windwards and the leewards, those areas are going to be impacted as well. And these feeder bands that come over, those can bring gusty winds. You can see some of these outflow signatures here. That's air that's pushing down and out from thunderstorms, collapsing air, kind of also a sign of the dry air. But boy, it definitely has seemingly really decent inflow coming in here with some of these bands trying to feed that center of circulation. We're going to see it go up and go down with convection over time, but generally speaking, the models seem to indicate modest strengthening. It's not an ideal environment, which is good news. You don't need me to tell you that. You know that. But it is going to bring some impacts here, starting with Barbados, and then points west and north from there. So you folks over here in the remainder of these islands, and you should know your island geography if you live there. You know which one of these is yours. Be ready. Trinidad, Tobago down here, yeah, maybe some of these showers and storms try to get over there. The air mass is kind of unstable, so a few periods of heavy rain and gusty winds are possible, but the core of the worst weather is likely to pass through that zone right there, generally speaking, over the next 24 hours or so. Now, as far as favorability for it, the upper ocean heat content all along the path from here on out of wherever Dorian ends up, if it does something like this, which is roughly what the Hurricane Center shows, nothing but increasing upper ocean heat content. And in very simple terms, that means that the water is warm not only at the surface, but also deep below, and in some cases several tens to maybe even hundreds of meters deep. So as it churns the water up, it's just churning up more warm water. That's why we call it the upper ocean heat content. It's not just at the skin of the ocean, that surface. It also extends fairly far below, and Dorian will be moving across ever-increasing areas of upper ocean heat content. Elsewhere, Africa, lit up with convective activity, strong African easterly jet over here at the mid-levels, pushing these disturbances out. It's only August 26th. We still have a lot of hurricane season left to go. All right, now let's take a look at the euro. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. We're going to come back to this. That gives you the end game, but that's fine. We're going to look at this one frame at a time. What I've done is I've taken the interface here that Levi has set up that's interactive, where you can zoom around and so forth. And we're going to look at this one day at a time. The European, unfortunately, we only get every 24 hours on the publicly available data. There are pay sites where you can add and have access to more hourly data. I don't know what it is, if it's 6 hours, 3 hours, or what. But they usually don't like you to show that on social media, YouTube, etc. And especially since I earn a living doing this with our Patreon, our crowdfunding, I respect that. So we're going to show it here off of Levi's site, the publicly accessible data, and crediting, of course, Levi per his terms of service, which he outlines down here. Want to make sure you give credit where credit is due. So let's start at the beginning here. The initial map, this is the analysis. Right there, that's what it says, okay? This is the 12Z run right there. See that? And this is the surface map, as well as 5,000 feet up, the vorticity signature. So let's take a look at what's what. We'll use blue here. This is 98L, large area of energy, kind of discombobulated. This is Dorian, smaller area of energy, more focused. All right? This is our high pressure area over the Atlantic, keeping Dorian kind of squashed down on this heading that it's currently located in at the moment. This is the initial condition, roughly 8 a.m. this morning. All right, so we're going to go out every 24 hours. This is 8 a.m. Tuesday morning. You notice between the two, it seems to pass very close to, maybe just south, the center of Barbados. And you notice by tomorrow morning, large area of energy here with 98L. Now let me point something out that's important. This being here does influence the ridging out here. I can't explain very easily how that works, but it affects what we call the heights in the atmosphere, and it's not that far away from Dorian. So the presence of 98L and eventually, I think the E storm is Aaron, it acts a little bit like a jackhammer, eroding the ridge just a little bit. It kind of pushes on it and erodes it a little bit, and that allows, I think, this change that we've seen, so that instead of Dorian coming in here at a low latitude and cruising into the area of the Caribbean that's very unfavorable, because of 98 up here, 98L, being there and exerting the influence that it has, it's fairly large. It erodes enough of this ridge, in my opinion, that's what I'm seeing. I could be off base here, but I've seen this before, and we've seen it too. Remember, Matthew was making a beeline towards Florida, and you had Nicole over there that weakened the ridge near Bermuda, and it caused it to shift just enough that Matthew stayed just a couple of tens of miles off of the Florida peninsula. Tropical cyclones interacting with the ridge of high pressure, or mid-latitude systems, hybrid, whatever you want to call this 98L feature, doesn't matter. It's an influence, and I think that it's eroding the ridge enough. It's not, certainly if this wasn't there, I think the ridging would be stronger and Dorian would be going more west. That's the simple way to put it. All right, so let's just get back to it, shall we? That's 24 hours. There's 48. And here's a huge difference. We're not seeing Dorian weaken and dissipate like we were before in the Northeast Caribbean. Also, this feature up here, which would presumably be Aaron, maybe a subtropical storm, and that's just meaning it's more spread out, more of a hybrid type thing. It's a classification. Don't worry about it. It's still like getting into the intricacies of what that means doesn't matter for you and me. It means for people the sensible weather that you can feel, windy, wet, big waves, whatever. And there it is. It's kind of knocking that ridge back just a little bit to allow Dorian to gain a little bit more latitude. And so if we go from the 3 frames already, initial, 24, 48, now to 72, what happens? It threads the Mona Passage right here, fairly close to Puerto Rico, more than likely, maybe even just touching the southwest portion. All right, and for what it's worth, the UK Met model, which is the United Kingdom Met model, if I showed you graphics to these, we'd be here. I don't have a watch. This is just a metaphorical look. It's a gesture. We'd be here. I mean, who wears a watch every day, right? You got an iPhone and clocks in front of you. We'd be here for 6 hours. But I looked at the UK Met guidance. That's another global model. It does take the center of Dorian over Puerto Rico for what it's worth. And it's generally a fairly reliable model. So we only get these every 24 hours. And so from 48 to 72, it comes close enough to Puerto Rico here that you definitely need to be paying attention. And then from 72 to 96 hours into the Turks and Caicos, Southeast Bahamas. That's 4 days out. Notice just not a lot of ridging over here. You can see the outline, this kind of counterclockwise look to the ridge over here. Not quite as strong because probably of the influence that Aaron to be had. And then finally here by day 5, the ridge is able to strengthen and come back in just enough. And you can see that little height lines coming in. There's the surface. I got to remember we're looking at surface isobars. But overall, the pattern in here, you can see the ridging in there, comes back, and that's day 5. So by day 6, do I have that? Yeah, I had that earlier. Let's go over here. Move me over there. We'll just look at it here. Day 6, there's 96, 120. So finally, and we'll just do this, make it easier. At day 6, voila, there it is, sitting real close to the coast of Florida. And let's just scoot this guy right there. Nice. Day 5, day 6. Not sure what to make of this. Very large area of energy over in the western Gulf. We'll see what becomes of that. High pressure building over the top, though. When I say over the top, north is usually the top of maps. And there you go. Day 6, possibly Dorian there. Heading towards, I'm just looking at my text messages here. For Florida, we'll have to wait and see. So if we look at the Euro and just animate this one more frame, that's day 6. At day 7, landfall, and it's over northern Florida. We'll see. That's a week out. So don't go freaking out just yet. All right, so here's something that I do want to look at that's very important. Let me get rid of me. These are all the Euro. Again, let's just start over. That's the beginning, step through time. You see what happens. Towards Florida by day 6. This is the GFS legacy, the Global Forecast System, the old version. And when I say old version, it's not like it's from 5 years ago and they haven't upgraded it. Okay? It's not like you had a 1998 Nissan Sentra and that's the old version of your car, and now you have a Tesla Model 3. That's not what I'm talking about. When you compare the old GFS, what we call the legacy GFS here, and the new and improved FV3 version of the GFS, it's the GFS with an upgrade that has small percentages of improvement, not giant percentages. Very important to note that as I show you this, because watch what the GFS does. Now this does give us every, I believe, 6 hours from Levi's site. There's Dorian right there. Try to draw an arrow to it. There's 98L. Easy to spot. Let's use the slider. Maybe. Watch how these evolve over time. See Dorian coming in there? right over the southwest part of Puerto Rico, goes east of Hispaniola, ridge starts to build over the top, and then into and across Florida from there. All right, why is this important? Well, a lot of reasons, but for one, closer to Puerto Rico for what it's worth, and that's the 60-hour mark. Let's go to 72, and let's look at the euro at 72. Very, very similar what we're seeing on the euro, just that's 72, just north of Dominican Republic. Old GFS also just north of the Dominican Republic. At 96 hours, there's 96. There's the euro at 96, just north of the Southeast Bahamas. GFS just north of the Southeast Bahamas, the legacy. Very good model agreement between the legacy GFS and the European. What does the new GFS show? Very easy. Thanks, Levi. We'll just click on GFS. At 96 hours, the new GFS, it's gone. Huge. Huge. It's gone. Doesn't even exist. It's just a leftover puff of clouds. Now that might verify, don't get me wrong, I'm not besmirching, but that is a giant discrepancy between what the euro shows and the legacy GFS. Wouldn't you agree? Absolutely. So, let's put me back where I belong there for the getting ready to sign out moment. We have a lot to watch, for sure. A couple of things of note. I am 90% sure, maybe even 95%, that I'm going to fly to Puerto Rico tomorrow. Brent is going to be there this evening. Brent Lynn, one of our patrons, one of our supporters, and he's also an active participant. He's also in our 2018 documentary, which is on Amazon Prime, Tracking the Hurricanes 2018. I'll put a link to it in the description. If I go to Puerto Rico, I'll be taking a couple of our live cams. I'll be mobile. We're going to have a truck to rent, etc. I'll talk more about that on a blog or something. But I'm looking like I'm going to go to Puerto Rico. Not so much that I think this is going to be some major impact, but even heavy rain could be a major impact. And in the wake of Maria, it's important to focus the attention on a place like Puerto Rico when they're going to have impacts because they're still recovering. And it's important to me as an earth scientist, as a geographer, that I cover these impacts when possible. And thanks to a combination of our crowdfunding from Patreon here, as well as my work with the Weather Channel, I license my services to them. I am able to do these things. And I think if I'm able to, I should. That being said, I do want to just mention this real quick, not so much as a sales pitch, but I'm doing much more with Patreon than I am with the HurricaneTrack.com site. All right? I will still, if you go to HurricaneTrack.com, you'll see my Twitter feeds embedded there. And it's more of a brand name. Because now, through social media, and especially Patreon, I can post my blogs at Patreon. And here's an example. This is what they look like. This is the one I did this morning. They can either be public, and you see it's a nice, well thought out, wordy blog, right? They can be public, or I can make them for patrons only at the different tiers over here. Anywhere from $1 to $10, $25 and up. It doesn't matter. In terms of these public blogs, they will be available for no cost. I don't want to charge money for everything, but I also have to fund what I'm doing. So if you go to Patreon, bookmark it. It's easy. Patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. You see it up there in the URL. And if a blog is made public, you can look at it. All of the videos that I do, like this one right now, I make them available for patrons first because they're supporting this. And then about 15 to 20 minutes later, I make them available publicly through YouTube. It's just a great way to try to serve all of the interests while also funding. It takes money. I mean, the plane ticket's going to be over $1,400. And thanks to the support, I'm able to do that. So just keep that in mind. I'm doing much more with Patreon. I do link it in with Hurricane Track Insider, our subscriber site, and it's all starting to come together in a very easy-to-use interface, both on the site, if you use Patreon as a web portal, but also you see the little Patreon logo right there? There it is. Also, the Patreon app as it shows up there. It's all right there. I have 161 patrons. Imagine what I could do if that number was 1,600. Are you kidding me? And we're getting there, so don't get me wrong. I much appreciate it. But that's what we're doing. I just want you to be aware of that. All right? So, a lot happening, a lot to keep up with. The other real quick beauty about Patreon is I can post to it very much like Twitter. And the public post will be available. You don't have to chip in $1 or more. It doesn't matter. Go to that, bookmark it, and when I have a public post, it'll be there. And I can do a quick snippet. I can do a 15-second video, whatever. I really, really like Patreon as a way to bring my brand to something that provides a social media type interface with the ability for you to help support what I'm doing. It's perfect. All right. And that being said, I will be posting there frequently. And it will show up too through Twitter, on HurricaneTrack.com, and of course on my YouTube channel. If you are not a subscriber to YouTube, go ahead and do so. And as I watch my kids and their gaming channels that they watch, and their pond monster adventures and all the other some nonsense that they some of it I'm like, what are you watching? They always mention setting notifications and all that, but that's true, and it's included, with the Patreon stuff. If you subscribe or you're a patron or whatever, you want to be notified, click the little bell or select notifications as active so that when I post something, you know about it immediately. It just makes good sense. All right? All right. I think that's about it. We have a lot to keep up with over the next few days. We'll see what happens with Dorian. Don't get too worked up about it just yet. When it's time to do so, I'll certainly let you know, and we'll talk about impacts more as we go forward. All right? I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. As always, thanks for tuning in from your device of choice. It's great to have you there. Without you, there would be no reason for me, so I appreciate you. Have a good rest of your Monday afternoon. I'll talk at you some more tomorrow, likely on my way to Puerto Rico.